My daughter kicked me out of the house after I refused to serve her mother-in-law like a maid. She's rich. Serve her plate and then go clean the bathroom. I cried in secret, but the action I took afterward left everyone horrified. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. I never thought my own daughter would make me feel so small. At 64, I thought I'd experienced every kind of hurt this world could offer, but standing in Amara's kitchen that evening, watching her fuss over preparations for Harriet's visit, I realized I was wrong. "Mom, make sure the silverware is perfectly aligned," Amara called from the living room where she was adjusting flowers for the third time. "Harriet notices everything, and I need this dinner to be flawless." I ran my fingers along the gleaming forks and knives, making sure each piece sat exactly where it should. My hands trembled slightly, not from age, but from the nervous energy that had been building all day. Harriet Whitmore, Elliot's mother, was coming for dinner. The woman who owned half the commercial real estate in our town, who drove a car worth more than most people's houses, who had never spoken to me as anything more than an inconvenience in her son's life. The doorbell rang at exactly 7 o'clock. Harriet didn't believe in being fashionably late. "Get the door, Mom," Amara hissed, smoothing her black dress one final time. "And remember what we discussed." What we discussed. The conversation from earlier that day still burned in my chest. Amara had sat me down like a child receiving instructions. "Harriet expects a certain level of service when she dines," she'd said, not meeting my eyes. "Just be helpful. Do whatever she needs." I opened the door to find Harriet standing there in a cream-colored coat that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She was a small woman, barely 5 feet tall, but she carried herself like someone accustomed to taking up all the space in any room. "Mrs. Whitmore," I said softly, stepping aside. "Please come in." She walked past me without acknowledgement, handing me her coat like I was the hired help. The weight of the expensive fabric in my arms felt heavier than it should have. Elliot appeared immediately, kissing his mother's cheek. "Mom, you look wonderful. How was the drive from the country club?" "Tedious," Harriet replied, settling into the wing-back chair that Amara had specifically designated as hers. "The construction on 5th Street is absolutely barbaric. Someone should do something about it." I stood there holding her coat, waiting for someone to tell me where to put it. When no one paid attention, I quietly hung it in the hall closet. Dinner began 20 minutes later. I had spent the entire afternoon preparing Harriet's favorite dishes: beef Wellington, roasted asparagus, and chocolate soufflé. My feet ached from standing all day, but I had wanted everything perfect for Amara. "Yvonne," Harriet said as I placed the salad course before her. It was the first time she'd said my name all evening. "This dressing is too tart." "I can make a fresh vinaigrette," I offered quickly. "No need," Amara interjected, shooting me a sharp look. "Mom will just use the regular ranch from the refrigerator." I nodded and headed to the kitchen, my cheeks burning. Ranch dressing from a bottle for the salad I'd spent an hour preparing with fresh herbs from my own garden. When I returned, Harriet was in the middle of a story about her recent cruise to the Mediterranean. "The service was impeccable," she was saying. "The staff anticipated every need before you even realized you had one. That's what proper service looks like." She glanced at me meaningfully as I set the ranch dressing beside her plate. The main course went no better. Harriet criticized the temperature of the beef, the seasoning on the asparagus, even the way I'd folded the napkins. Each comment felt like a small slap, but what hurt more was watching Amara agree with every criticism. "You're absolutely right, Harriet," Amara said when her mother-in-law complained that the wine glasses had water spots. "Mom, could you re-wash these quickly?" I took the glasses to the kitchen, my hands shaking as I dried each one with a fresh towel. Through the doorway, I could hear them laughing about something. The sound felt sharp against my ears. By the time dessert was served, I felt like a ghost moving through someone else's house. When Harriet's coffee cup was empty, she simply held it up without looking at me, expecting it to be refilled. When she dropped her napkin, she waited for me to notice and replace it. The final blow came as dinner ended. "Yvonne," Harriet said, standing and smoothing her silk blouse. "I'd like to freshen up before I leave. Please ensure the powder room is spotless." My heart stopped. She wanted me to clean the bathroom. Not just tidy up, clean it, like hired help. I looked at Amara, waiting for her to intervene, to say something, anything, to preserve what little dignity I had left. Instead, she smiled brightly. "Of course, Harriet, Mom. Make sure everything is perfect in there. Check the hand towels and make sure the mirror is streak-free." The words hung in the air like a poison cloud. My daughter, the child I had raised alone after her father left, the woman I had supported through college and her early married years, was asking me to scrub toilets for her mother-in-law's approval. I stood there for a moment, feeling every pair of eyes on me. Harriet looked expectant. Elliot looked uncomfortable but said nothing. And Amara looked impatient, as if I were being unreasonably slow to comply. "She's rich," Amara said, her voice taking on an edge when I didn't immediately move. "Serve her properly and then go clean the bathroom. This is important to us, Mom." The words cut deeper than any knife could have. I felt something break inside my chest, something that had been holding me together for years. But I nodded, because what else could I do? This was my daughter's house. Her marriage, her life I was supposedly helping to secure. I walked to the powder room with my cleaning supplies, my vision blurred by tears I refused to let fall. As I knelt beside the toilet with a scrub brush, I could hear them in the dining room, their voices warm and animated now that the uncomfortable moment had passed. But it was what I heard next that shattered what was left of my heart. "She's actually quite useful," Harriet's voice carried clearly through the thin walls. "So obedient. You've trained her well." And then Amara's laugh, bright, pleased, satisfied. "She knows her place. It just took some time to get her there." I sat back on my heels, staring at my reflection in the toilet bowl I'd just cleaned, and finally understood what I had become in my daughter's life. Not a mother. Not family. Just useful. The realization hit me like a physical blow, and I had to grip the edge of the sink to steady myself. Was this what the rest of my life would look like? Being useful until I wasn't anymore? I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Harriet's words, "So obedient. You've trained her well," and Amara's laugh echoing through my mind like a cruel melody I couldn't shake. By morning, I had convinced myself that maybe I was overreacting. Maybe Amara hadn't meant it the way it sounded. Maybe in the light of day we could talk about what happened and find our way back to being mother and daughter instead of whatever we had become. I found Amara in her kitchen, still in her silk robe, scrolling through her phone while her coffee grew cold. She looked up when I entered, and for just a moment, I saw something soft in her expression. Hope flickered in my chest. "Good morning, sweetheart," I said carefully, pouring myself a cup from the pot she'd already made. "Thank you for letting me stay over. I was too tired to drive home last night." She nodded absently, returning to her phone. Harriet texted this morning. She was very impressed with dinner." "That's wonderful," I said, sitting across from her at the kitchen island, my hands wrapped around the warm mug, seeking comfort. "Amara, I wanted to talk to you about last night." Her fingers stopped scrolling. "What about it?" I took a breath, choosing my words carefully. I felt a little uncomfortable with how things went, the way Harriet spoke to me, and asking me to clean the bathroom. I trailed off, watching her face. Amara set her phone down with more force than necessary. "Uncomfortable? Mom, what exactly are you saying?" "I'm saying that I'm your mother, not the hired help. I was happy to cook dinner and serve our guest, but when she started ordering me around and you encouraged it," I stopped, seeing the storm building in her eyes. "Encouraged it?" Amara's voice rose an octave. "I was trying to make a good impression on my mother-in-law. Do you understand how important she is to our future? To Elliot's business connections? I understand that she's important to you," I said quietly. "But I'm important too. I'm your mother." Amara stood up so quickly her chair scraped against the floor. "And as my mother, shouldn't you want what's best for me? Shouldn't you want to help me succeed?" "Of course I do, but nothing." She began pacing the kitchen, her robe billowing behind her. "Do you know what Harriet could do for us? She has connections with the planning commission, with the mayor's office. Elliot's architectural firm could get contracts worth millions if she puts in a good word. I stared at my daughter, this woman I had raised to be strong and independent, watching her reduce herself to a social climber. And you think the way to earn those connections is by humiliating your own mother. Humiliating? Amara spun to face me, her face flushed with anger. You think being asked to serve dinner and clean a bathroom is humiliating? Do you know what's actually humiliating, Mom? Having a mother who's so proud and stubborn that she can't see the bigger picture. The words hit me like a slap. Amara, please, just listen to yourself. You're talking about treating me like a servant in your own home. And you're talking like someone who thinks she's too good to help her own daughter. Amara's voice had become shrill now. You know what your problem is, Mom? You've always been jealous. Jealous? I couldn't hide my shock. Jealous of what? Of my success. Of my marriage. Of the life I've built. She was getting more agitated by the second. You never had any of this. Dad left you with nothing. And you've spent the rest of your life resenting anyone who has more than you do. The cruelty of it took my breath away. How can you say that to me? I worked 2 jobs to put you through college. I gave up dating, gave up any chance at happiness of my own, to make sure you had every opportunity. And now, you want me to pay for that forever? Amara shot back. You want me to sacrifice my future because you made choices that didn't work out? I felt tears starting to sting my eyes, but I blinked them back. I want you to treat me with basic human dignity. Dignity? Amara laughed, but there was no humor in it. Mom, what do you actually bring to this family? What do you contribute? You don't have money like Harriet does. You don't have connections or influence. All you have to offer is service. And you can't even do that without complaining. Each word was like a nail being driven into my heart. This was my daughter. The baby I had rocked to sleep, the little girl whose scraped knees I had kissed better, the young woman whose dreams I had supported even when they seemed impossible. I brought you love, I whispered. I brought you a mother's love. Love doesn't pay the bills, Mom. Love doesn't secure Elliot's future or mine. At that moment, Elliot appeared in the doorway, still in his pajamas, hair messed from sleep. He looked between us with obvious discomfort. Everything okay in here? He asked, though his tone suggested he already knew it wasn't. Amara turned to him immediately, seeking an ally. I was just explaining to Mom that we need her to be more accommodating when Harriet visits. Elliot shifted uncomfortably. Mom seemed a little tense last night, he said carefully. I mean, Harriet noticed. Noticed what? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. Just that you seemed resistant to helping out, Elliot said, not meeting my eyes. She mentioned that you didn't seem very happy about serving dinner. I stared at him in disbelief. I cooked for 6 hours. I served every course. I cleaned your bathroom with a scrub brush while you all sat comfortably in the dining room. But you did it with an attitude, Amara interjected. Harriet could tell you were unhappy about it. That made everyone uncomfortable. Of course I was unhappy about it. The words exploded out of me before I could stop them. I was being treated like hired help in my own daughter's home. It's not your home, Mom, Amara said quietly, and the simple statement cut deeper than all her shouting had. This is my home, mine and Elliot's, and in our home, we need people who support our goals, not people who make things difficult. I felt the ground shifting beneath me. What are you saying? Amara and Elliot exchanged a look that spoke volumes. Then Amara straightened her shoulders and looked at me with the cold determination I recognized from her business dealings. I'm saying you need to decide what kind of relationship you want with us. If you want to be part of this family, you need to accept your role. Help when we ask for help, without complaints or drama. Make Harriet feel welcomed and respected when she visits. And if I don't? Another look passed between them. This time, Elliot spoke. Then maybe it's better if you don't visit when Harriet's here, he said softly. Maybe it's better if you take some time to think about what's really important. The room fell silent except for the ticking of the kitchen clock and the distant hum of the refrigerator. I looked at my daughter, searching her face for any sign of the child I had loved so fiercely, the young woman I had sacrificed everything for. I saw a stranger. So those are my choices? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Be your servant or be cut out of your life. Amara's jaw tightened. Don't be so dramatic, Mom. We're asking you to be helpful, to be part of the team. The team, I repeated. And what position am I playing on this team? She didn't answer, but she didn't need to. I could see it in her eyes, in the set of her shoulders, in the way she looked at me like I was a problem to be solved rather than her mother. I was the help, nothing more, nothing less. I stood up slowly, feeling every one of my 64 years in my aching bones. I need to go home. Mom, Amara started, but I held up a hand. I need to think, I said, about what you've said, about what you're asking me to do. I walked upstairs to gather my overnight bag, my legs feeling heavy with each step. Behind me, I could hear them whispering, but I couldn't make out the words. Maybe I didn't want to. As I packed my few belongings, I caught sight of myself in Amara's guest room mirror. I looked old, tired, defeated. When had I become this person? When had I become someone who could be dismissed so easily by her own child? I was almost to my car when I heard the front door open behind me. Mom, wait! Amara called out. I turned, hoping against hope that she had come to apologize, to take back the horrible things she'd said, to remember that she loved me. Instead, she stood on her front porch in her expensive robe, looking like she was already regretting coming after me. Just think about what we discussed, okay? She said. This doesn't have to be complicated. We can still be a family. I looked at her, my beautiful, successful, heartless daughter, and felt something fundamental shift inside me. The last thread of hope I'd been clinging to finally snapped. You're right, I said quietly. It doesn't have to be complicated at all. I got in my car and drove away, leaving her standing there on her perfect porch in her perfect neighborhood, with her perfect life that had no room in it for a mother who wanted to be treated like more than furniture. But as I drove home to my small apartment, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Something told me that the life Amara thought was so perfect was built on much shakier ground than she realized. The first 3 days after leaving Amara's house passed in a blur of sleepless nights and untouched meals. I kept replaying every moment of that awful dinner, every cruel word from the morning after, trying to understand how my relationship with my daughter had deteriorated so completely. My small one-bedroom apartment felt even smaller now, like a box I'd been shoved into and forgotten about. The silence was deafening. For years, even when Amara and I weren't speaking regularly, I always knew she was there. A phone call away, part of my life, part of my world. Now that connection felt severed, and I wasn't sure how to exist without it. I wandered from room to room like a ghost, picking up books I couldn't concentrate on, starting household tasks I'd abandon halfway through. The walls seemed to close in on me, filled with photographs of Amara at various stages of her life. Graduation pictures, wedding photos, holiday celebrations where we'd both been smiling and happy. Had it all been an act? Had she always seen me as a burden, as someone useful but ultimately disposable? On Thursday morning, I was sitting at my kitchen table staring at a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold when my laptop chimed with an incoming email. I almost ignored it. Most of my correspondence these days was bills or advertisements, but something made me look. The sender was Morrison & Associates, the accounting firm that handled the books for Amara's interior design business. I frowned, clicking it open. Why would they be contacting me directly? Then I remembered. When Amara had started her business 5 years ago, I'd helped her set it up. We'd listed me as a secondary contact for important financial documents, partly because she traveled frequently for client meetings, and partly because I'd helped her secure the initial startup loan. I was still officially listed as a partner, though I'd never taken an active role in the day-to-day operations. The email was routine, a monthly financial summary that I usually glanced at and deleted. But today, with nothing but time and heartache to fill my hours, I actually opened the attachment. At first, the columns of numbers meant nothing to me. Revenue, expenses, profit margins, all the dry details of running a business. But as I scrolled down to the transaction details, something caught my eye. There, in the deposit section, was a series of transfers that made my stomach clench. Large sums of money. $5,000 here, $8,500 there, $12,000 the month before, all coming from an account labeled H. Whitmore Personal. Harriet's money. Going directly into Amara's business account. I stared at the screen, feeling my pulse quicken. When had Harriet invested in Amara's business? In all our conversations about the company's growth, Amara had never mentioned taking on an investor, especially not her mother-in-law. The deposits were substantial and regular, dating back almost 8 months, but something felt wrong about it. The timing, the amounts, the fact that these transfers seemed to accelerate around the same time that Amara had started putting pressure on me to be more accommodating during Harriet's visits. I clicked through to the previous month's report, then the one before that. The pattern was clear. Regular, significant transfers from Harriet's personal account to Amara's business, but there was no corresponding documentation that I could see, no investment agreements, no partnership papers, no formal arrangements that would typically accompany such substantial financial backing. My hands were trembling as I reached for my phone. I still had contacts at the bank where Amara had her business accounts, people who knew me from when I'd helped her set everything up. Maybe they could provide some clarity. Mrs. Chen, this is Yvonne Hartwell, Amara Hartwell Morrison's business partner. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. Linda Chen had been Amara's business banker from the beginning. She was a kind woman in her 50s who had always been helpful during the startup process. Yvonne, it's so good to hear from you. How are things going with the business? That's actually what I'm calling about, I said carefully. I was looking at our recent financial reports and I noticed some large deposits from H. Whitmore. I wanted to make sure everything was properly documented on our end. There was a pause. The Whitmore transfers? Yes, those have been quite regular lately. Is there a problem with the documentation? Well, that's just it. I don't seem to have any records of an investment agreement or partnership arrangement with Mrs. Whitmore. I wanted to make sure we hadn't missed filing something important. Another pause, longer this time. Yvonne, I'm looking at the account notes here, and these transfers are listed as family contributions rather than formal investments. Amara told us they were gifts from her mother-in-law to help with business expansion. My blood ran cold. Gifts? That's what we have on file. Large family gifts to support the business. They're not structured as loans or investments, just contributions. I thanked Linda and hung up, my mind racing. Gifts. Harriet was supposedly giving Amara thousands of dollars every month as gifts, but that didn't make sense. From everything I'd observed about their relationship, Harriet was demanding and controlling, not generous and giving. She was the type of person who kept track of every favor, every kindness, expecting them to be repaid with interest. And there was something else nagging at me. During that awful dinner, when Harriet had been criticizing everything and treating me like hired help, I'd gotten the distinct impression that she enjoyed having power over people. She liked being the wealthy woman whose approval everyone sought. Would someone like that really be handing over thousands of dollars without expecting something significant in return? I spent the rest of the day poring over the financial records I had access to, and the picture that emerged made my stomach turn. The transfers from Harriet's account had started small, $2,000 here and there. But they'd grown larger and more frequent over time, and they didn't correspond to any business milestones or growth patterns that would justify such substantial gifts. More troubling still, when I looked at how the money was being used, it wasn't going toward business expenses. Large portions were being transferred out of the business account into what appeared to be personal accounts. Money that was supposedly being given to help Amara's interior design company grow was instead funding an expensive lifestyle. But the most damning detail was in the timing. The largest transfers had occurred during periods when, according to social media posts I could still see on Amara's public accounts, Harriet had been traveling or dealing with health issues, the kind of times when an elderly woman might not be monitoring her finances as closely as usual. I sat back in my chair, feeling sick. It couldn't be what it looked like. Amara wouldn't steal from her mother-in-law. She might be cold and calculating. She might prioritize money over relationships. But she wasn't a thief, was she? I tried to think of alternative explanations. Maybe Harriet really was investing in the business and just didn't want it formalized. Maybe she was helping Amara and Elliot with personal expenses as a way of supporting their marriage. Maybe there was a perfectly innocent explanation for why thousands of dollars were flowing from an elderly woman's personal account into my daughter's business without any formal agreements or documentation. But deep in my gut, I knew better. The way Amara had been so desperate to impress Harriet, so insistent that I cater to her every whim, so determined to maintain a relationship that seemed to bring her no joy. It all made horrible sense if she was stealing from the woman. And there was something else. Something that made my blood run cold when I thought about it. The way Harriet had treated me during dinner, ordering me around like hired help while Amara not only allowed it, but encouraged it. What if that wasn't just about social climbing? What if Amara was deliberately fostering a dynamic where Harriet felt powerful and in control? Where she felt like the generous benefactor who deserved to be catered to? What if my humiliation had been part of a larger manipulation? I closed the laptop and walked to the kitchen window, staring out at the parking lot of my apartment complex. The autumn sky was gray and heavy with unshed rain, matching the weight I felt in my chest. My daughter wasn't just cold and ungrateful. If I was right about what I was seeing in these financial records, she was a criminal. She was stealing from an elderly woman, using her marriage and her family relationships as cover for theft. And she had turned me into an unwitting accomplice, making me serve and clean and humble myself to maintain the illusion that we were all one happy family, that Harriet was the beloved matriarch whose generosity deserved our grateful servitude. The worst part was how perfectly it had worked. Harriet had felt powerful and respected, Amara had gotten her money, and I had been the useful tool that made it all possible. My humiliation hadn't been a byproduct of Amara's social climbing. It had been an essential part of her con. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass of the window and finally let myself cry. Not just for the loss of my relationship with my daughter, but for the discovery of who she really was. The child I had raised, the woman I had sacrificed everything for, was a stranger to me. Worse than a stranger, she was someone I wouldn't want to know if we weren't related. But as the tears dried on my cheeks, I felt something else stirring inside me, something harder and colder than grief. If Amara thought she could use me as a prop in her scheme to defraud an elderly woman, she had made a serious miscalculation. I might be old, I might be alone, I might have been foolish enough to let myself be humiliated for the sake of family peace, but I wasn't going to stand by and watch her destroy an innocent person's life. It was time Harriet knew exactly what kind of daughter-in-law she had. Sleep became impossible after discovering those financial records. I'd lie in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind churning through the implications of what I'd seen, trying to convince myself there had to be another explanation. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw those numbers, $47,000 in total over 8 months, flowing from Harriet's personal account into Amara's business with no documentation, no agreements, no legitimate business purpose. By Friday morning, I knew I had to dig deeper. I couldn't go to Harriet with suspicions. I needed facts, hard evidence that would be impossible to explain away or dismiss. I made coffee and sat down at my laptop with grim determination. If Amara was stealing from her mother-in-law, there would be a trail. Thieves, even smart ones, always left breadcrumbs. The first thing I did was access the business's online banking portal. As a listed partner, I still had login credentials, though I'd rarely used them since helping Amara set up the accounts years ago. I held my breath as I entered the password, half expecting to find that my access had been revoked. But the screen loaded without issue, showing me real-time account activity. What I saw made my stomach drop. The pattern was even more extensive than the monthly summaries had revealed. Not only were there regular transfers from Harriet's account, but there were also cash withdrawals and transfers to personal accounts that didn't match any legitimate business expenses I could identify. Money was flowing in from Harriet and flowing right back out to fund what looked like personal purchases. I spent the next 2 hours going through transaction records line by line, cross-referencing dates and amounts. A $3,000 withdrawal on the same day Amara had posted Instagram photos from an expensive spa weekend. A $8,500 transfer to Elliot's personal account the week before they'd taken their anniversary trip to Napa Valley. Thousands of dollars in cash withdrawals with no business justification whatsoever. But I needed more than just financial records. I needed to understand how this scheme was working, how Amara was getting access to Harriet's money in the first place. That's when I remembered something that had puzzled me during that awful dinner. Harriet had mentioned several times that she was so grateful that Amara helped her with those confusing financial matters, and that it was wonderful to have someone young and smart handling her complicated affairs. At the time, I'd thought she was just being condescending about Amara's business acumen. Now I wondered if it meant something more sinister. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in months. Riverside Country Club, Member Services. Hello, this is Yvonne Hartwell. I'm calling on behalf of Mrs. Harriet Whitmore. She asked me to confirm some details about her recent account activity. It was a gamble, but people at expensive clubs were used to members having assistants and family members handle routine inquiries. Of course, Ms. Hartwell. How can I help you? Mrs. Whitmore wanted me to verify whether her automatic payment arrangements are still in place. She's been having some confusion about which bills are being paid directly from her accounts. Let me check her file. Yes, I see she has several automatic payments set up. Her monthly membership fees, spa services, and dining minimums are all handled through automatic withdrawal. Is there a specific payment she was concerned about? She mentioned something about business-related payments. She wasn't sure if those were still active. There was a pause. I don't show any business payments in our system, but Mrs. Whitmore did mention that her daughter-in-law handles most of her personal finance management now. You might want to check with the bank directly. My heart was pounding as I hung up. Amara was handling Harriet's personal finance management. That explained how the transfers were happening so regularly and in such substantial amounts. Harriet had given Amara access to her accounts, trusting her to help manage bills and expenses, and Amara was using that access to steal from her. I spent the rest of the morning making careful inquiries, posing as Harriet's representative or family member. What I discovered painted a picture of systematic financial exploitation that made me feel physically ill. Amara hadn't just been given access to one account. She had power of attorney privileges for several of Harriet's financial affairs. She could make transfers, pay bills, and manage investments on Harriet's behalf. It was an arrangement that made sense on the surface. Harriet was in her 70s, traveled frequently, and might legitimately need help keeping track of complex finances. But Amara was abusing that trust in the most calculated way possible. The transfers weren't random or opportunistic. They were carefully structured to avoid triggering automatic fraud alerts. The amounts varied just enough to seem organic. They occurred during times when Harriet was likely to be distracted or unavailable, and they were always labeled as family support or business development, categories that would seem reasonable if Harriet happened to notice them during routine account reviews. It was sophisticated, methodical theft disguised as family financial planning. But the discovery that truly broke my heart came when I found Amara's personal social media accounts, the private ones she thought only close friends could see. Through some careful internet searching and social media cross-referencing, I found posts dating back almost a year where Amara talked about her financial strategy with casual cruelty that took my breath away. Managing the old lady's money is easier than I thought, read one post from 6 months ago. She barely pays attention to where it goes as long as she feels important and in control. Another, from just 2 months ago. The key is making them feel generous and appreciated. Let them play the role of the wealthy matriarch, and they'll fund whatever lifestyle you want. And the one that made me physically nauseous. Sometimes I can't believe how easy this is. She actually thanks me for helping with her finances. If she knew what I was really doing, she'd probably have a heart attack. Lol. I stared at the screen in horror. These weren't the words of someone who had gradually succumbed to temptation or made poor decisions in a moment of weakness. This was a predator talking about her victim with gleeful calculation. My daughter wasn't just stealing from an elderly woman. She was enjoying it. The final piece of the puzzle came from an unexpected source. While I was printing out screenshots of the social media posts, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Elliot's office number. Mrs. Hartwell? This is Janet from Elliot Morrison Architecture. I'm so sorry to bother you, but we have a payment issue we're hoping you can help clarify. My pulse quickened. What kind of payment issue? Well, we've been receiving monthly payments from a Mrs. H. Whitmore for the past several months. The payments are substantial, usually around $4,000, and they're labeled as architectural consulting fees. But Mr. Morrison hasn't done any work for a Mrs. Whitmore, and we can't find any contracts or project records in our system. I felt the blood drain from my face. These payments are going directly to Elliot's firm? Yes, ma'am. We've been depositing them and setting the money aside because we weren't sure what to do. Mr. Morrison keeps saying he'll look into it, but he's been traveling a lot lately and, well, we're getting concerned about the accounting irregularities. How much money are we talking about in total? About $28,000 over the past 7 months. It's a significant amount, and we need to either return it or properly document whatever services it's supposed to cover. I thanked Janet and hung up, my hands shaking. It wasn't just Amara. Elliot was involved too, taking money directly from his mother's accounts under the guise of architectural consulting fees for work that didn't exist. They were working together to systematically rob Harriet Whitmore. I spent the rest of that day organizing everything I'd discovered. Financial records showing the transfers from Harriet's accounts to Amara's business. Screenshots of social media posts revealing the calculating nature of the scheme. Phone records and documentation proving that Harriet's money was being funneled into personal accounts and used for vacations, spa treatments, and lifestyle expenses that had nothing to do with business operations. By evening, I had assembled a comprehensive dossier that painted an undeniable picture of financial elder abuse. But as I sat there looking at the evidence spread across my kitchen table, I felt something I hadn't expected. A deep, crushing sadness that went beyond anger or betrayal. This was my daughter. The baby I had held in my arms. The toddler whose fears I had soothed. The young woman whose dreams I had supported even when money was tight and sacrifices were hard. I had raised her to be strong, independent, and successful. I had never imagined I was raising someone who would prey on elderly people for money. The woman who had humiliated me in her kitchen, who had told me I was only valuable for my service, who had treated me like furniture in front of her victim. That woman was a stranger wearing my daughter's face. But Harriet wasn't a stranger. She was an elderly woman who trusted her son and daughter-in-law to help protect her interests, not exploit them. She might be demanding and difficult, but she didn't deserve to be stolen from by the very people she considered family. I gathered up all the evidence and put it in a manila folder. Tomorrow, I would drive to Harriet's estate and show her exactly what kind of family she had welcomed into her life. It was time for the truth to come out, no matter how much it would cost me. Because the daughter I had loved was already gone. The woman living in her house, using her name, building her life on stolen money. She wasn't someone I recognized anymore, and I wouldn't protect a criminal, even if she had once been my child. The drive to Harriet's estate felt longer than the actual 40 minutes it took. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles had gone white, and the manila folder containing all the evidence sat on the passenger seat like a loaded weapon. I'd barely slept the night before, running through different scenarios of how this conversation might go. Would Harriet believe me? Would she think I was a bitter ex-mother-in-law trying to cause trouble? Would she even listen before having me escorted off her property? But every time doubt crept in, I remembered Amara's social media posts. She actually thanks me for helping with her finances. If she knew what I was really doing, she'd probably have a heart attack. Lol, the cruelty of it steeled my resolve. Harriet deserved to know the truth, regardless of how difficult this conversation would be. The Whitmore estate sat behind ornate iron gates on 15 acres of meticulously maintained grounds. I'd only been here once before, for Amara and Elliot's engagement party 3 years ago. Even then, I'd felt out of place among the marble statuary and imported rose gardens. I pressed the button on the intercom at the gate, my heart hammering against my ribs. Whitmore residence. This is Yvonne Hartwell. I need to speak with Mrs. Whitmore about an urgent family matter. There was a long pause. Mrs. Whitmore isn't expecting any visitors today. Please tell her it's about Amara and Elliot. It's extremely important. Another pause. Then the gate swung open with a mechanical hum. I drove up the winding driveway, past perfectly trimmed hedges and a fountain that probably cost more than I'd made in the past 5 years. The house itself was a sprawling Georgian colonial with white columns and enough windows to light a small town. Harriet met me at the front door, dressed in a cream-colored cashmere sweater set that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Her silver hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless despite it being barely 10 in the morning. She looked every inch the wealthy matriarch, but there was something in her eyes, a wariness that suggested she sensed this wasn't a social call. "Yvonne," she said coolly, "this is unexpected. I hope everything is all right with Amara and Elliot." "That's what I need to discuss with you, Mrs. Whitmore. May I come in?" She hesitated for just a moment, then stepped aside. "Of course. Let's go to the sitting room." The sitting room was exactly what I'd expected. Expensive furniture arranged with mathematical precision, oil paintings of long-dead Whitmore ancestors staring down from the walls, fresh flowers that had probably been arranged by a professional that morning. Everything perfect, everything controlled, everything designed to reinforce the owner's status and power. Harriet settled into a high-backed chair that looked more like a throne than furniture, and gestured for me to sit across from her. The distance between us felt intentional, a reminder of our respective places in the social hierarchy. "Now then," she said, folding her hands in her lap, "what's this urgent family matter you need to discuss?" I opened the manila folder with trembling fingers. There was no gentle way to do this, no way to soften what I was about to reveal. "Mrs. Whitmore, I need to show you something. I discovered it by accident, and I've spent the past week verifying everything. I wish I didn't have to be the one to tell you this, but..." I took a deep breath. "Amara and Elliot have been stealing money from your accounts." Harriet's face went completely still. "Excuse me?" "They've been taking thousands of dollars from your personal accounts over the past 8 months. Large transfers that they've disguised as business investments and consulting fees." I pulled out the first set of financial records. "These are copies of your bank statements showing transfers to Amara's interior design business. Over $47,000 total." Harriet leaned forward slightly, her eyes scanning the papers I'd placed on the coffee table between us. Her expression was unreadable. "This shows money going to Amara's business," she said carefully. "I've been supporting their endeavors. That's not theft." "With respect, Mrs. Whitmore, did you authorize these specific transfers? Did you know that this money wasn't being used for business purposes, but for personal vacations and luxury purchases?" I spread out the next set of documents, the business account records showing how the money had been immediately transferred out or withdrawn in cash, cross-referenced with social media posts showing Amara and Elliot's expensive lifestyle choices. Harriet's face grew paler as she examined the evidence. "These dates, Elliot told me he needed funds for a major project last month. He said it was a time-sensitive opportunity that would benefit both his firm and our family's investments." "Mrs. Whitmore, I spoke to Elliot's office yesterday. They've been receiving payments labeled as architectural consulting fees from your account, $28,000 worth. But there are no contracts, no projects, no work being done. Elliot's own staff is confused about why they keep receiving money for services that don't exist." I watched the color drain completely from her face. She picked up one of the bank statements with shaking fingers, studying it more carefully. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Amara has been helping me manage my finances. She said the money was going toward investments that would benefit all of us. She's been so helpful, so attentive. That's how this type of theft works," I said gently. "They gain your trust, make themselves indispensable, then gradually increase their access to your finances. Look at these social media posts." I showed her the screenshots from Amara's private accounts. Harriet's hands trembled as she read her daughter-in-law's cruel words about managing the old lady's money and making her feel generous and appreciated while funding their lifestyle. The silence that followed was deafening. Harriet stared at the evidence spread across her pristine coffee table, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. "She calls me the old lady," Harriet said finally, her voice barely audible. "She jokes about me having a heart attack if I found out what she was doing. I'm so sorry. Mrs. Whitmore, I know how difficult this must be." Harriet's grief transformed into something harder, colder. When she looked up at me, her eyes were filled with a fury I hadn't expected. "They made a fool of me," she said, her voice gaining strength. "In my own home, at my own table, they made me feel like a generous benefactor while they picked my pockets." "There's more," I said quietly. "I think the way they've been treating me, the way they insisted I serve you and clean for you during that dinner, I think it was all part of the manipulation. They wanted you to feel powerful and in control, like the gracious matriarch who deserved to be waited on. It made the financial help seem more reasonable, more like something a wealthy patron might do for grateful family members." Harriet's eyes flashed with understanding and rage. "They used you. They used both of us. Yes. And I think they plan to continue doing it indefinitely." Harriet stood up abruptly, pacing to the window that looked out over her manicured gardens. When she turned back to me, her expression was steely with determination. "How much total?" she asked. I consulted my notes. "From what I can document, approximately $75,000 over the past 8 months. But Mrs. Whitmore, given how sophisticated this scheme is, there might be more that I haven't discovered yet." She nodded grimly. "I want to confront them. Tonight. I want them to look me in the eye and explain this." "Are you sure you want to do that? Maybe you should speak to a lawyer first, or—" "No." Her voice was iron. "I want to see their faces when they realize their little game is over. I want them to know that the foolish old lady they've been robbing isn't as helpless as they thought." She walked to an antique desk in the corner and pulled out her phone. "I'm going to call them right now. I'll tell them I want to have dinner tonight here at the house. A family dinner to discuss some important financial matters. Mrs. Whitmore, please be careful. If they realize what you know, they won't," she said with cold certainty. "They think they're so clever, so much smarter than the doddering old woman they've been manipulating. They'll come because they think it's another opportunity to steal from me." She dialed Amara's number, and I could hear it ringing through the phone's speaker. "Harriet!" Amara's voice was bright and cheerful, full of the false warmth I now recognized as manipulation. "How lovely to hear from you. How are you feeling?" "I'm doing well, dear. I was hoping you and Elliot could come for dinner tonight. There are some financial matters I'd like to discuss with you both." There was a pause. "Financial matters? Is everything all right?" "Oh yes, everything's fine. I've just been reviewing some of my accounts, and I'd like your input on a few decisions. You know how much I value your guidance on these complicated matters." I could practically hear Amara's greed through the phone. "Of course, Harriet. We'd be delighted to help. What time works for you?" 7 o'clock. "And Amara? Don't bring Yvonne this time. I think we should keep this conversation just within the immediate family." Another pause. Shorter this time. "Absolutely. Just the 3 of us. We'll see you at 7. Harriet hung up and looked at me with grim satisfaction. "They're coming. They think they're walking into another opportunity to manipulate me. What will you do? What will you say to them?" Harriet's smile was cold and sharp as a blade. "I'm going to give them exactly what they deserve. But first, I need to make some phone calls. My lawyer, my banker, and my accountant. It's time to make sure that when this is over, they face consequences for what they've done." She turned to me, and for the first time since I'd arrived, her expression softened slightly. "Yvonne, I owe you an apology. The way I treated you at that dinner, the way I let them treat you. I understand now that it was all part of their manipulation, but that doesn't excuse my behavior. You didn't deserve to be humiliated in service of their con game." I felt tears prick at my eyes. "Thank you for saying that. Will you stay for dinner tonight? I think you've earned the right to see how this ends." I looked at this woman who had once made me scrub her bathroom, who had treated me like hired help while my own daughter orchestrated my humiliation. Now she was offering me a seat at the table where justice would finally be served. "Yes," I said quietly. "I think I'd like that very much." 7 o'clock arrived with the weight of an execution. I sat in Harriet's sitting room, watching through the window as Amara's sleek BMW pulled up the circular driveway. My stomach churned with anxiety and anticipation as I saw my daughter and son-in-law step out of the car, both dressed in expensive clothes that had probably been purchased with Harriet's stolen money. They walked up to the front door with confident strides, Elliot adjusting his designer tie, Amara smoothing her silk dress, They looked like the picture of success and sophistication. They had no idea they were walking into their own reckoning. Harriet had spent the afternoon making calls to her lawyer and accountant, setting wheels in motion that would ensure this confrontation had real consequences. She'd also had me move to the study, where I could hear everything through the open French doors but remain out of sight until the right moment. Remember, she'd told me as we'd planned this confrontation, they need to understand that their victims aren't helpless, that their manipulation didn't work because we were weak, but because we trusted them. I heard the front door open, followed by Amara's bright, artificial voice. "Harriet, you look wonderful. Thank you so much for inviting us over." "Elliot." Harriet's voice was perfectly controlled, giving away nothing. "How good of you both to come on such short notice." "Of course," Elliot replied. "We're always happy to help with any financial questions you might have." I could hear them moving into the dining room, their voices becoming slightly muffled by distance. Harriet had set the table with her finest china and crystal, as if this were indeed a normal family dinner. The irony wasn't lost on me. My daughter was about to be served her comeuppance on bone china worth more than my car. "I hope you don't mind," Harriet was saying, "but I've asked my lawyer to join us by phone later. There are some documents I'd like to review with all of you present." "Documents?" Amara's voice carried just a hint of tension. "Investment papers, account authorizations, that sort of thing. I'm trying to get better organized about my financial affairs. You know how scattered I can be about these matters." Elliot laughed, and the sound made my skin crawl. "You're hardly scattered, Mother. You've always been very sharp about business. Have I? Sometimes I wonder. There are transactions in my accounts that I'm having trouble remembering authorizing. Large transfers that I'm sure I approved, but the details are becoming fuzzy." I held my breath, waiting for their response. "Well, that's perfectly normal," Amara said smoothly. "You handle so many different investments and accounts. That's why you asked us to help keep track of everything, remember?" "Yes, I do remember asking for help, though I'm having trouble remembering asking for quite this much help." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. I could practically feel the tension radiating through the walls. "I'm not sure I understand," Elliot said carefully. "Oh, I think you understand perfectly." Harriet's voice had transformed completely, losing all pretense of frail confusion and becoming sharp as steel. "I think you understand exactly how much help you've been giving yourselves to my money." The silence that followed was deafening. "Harriet," Amara began, her voice higher than usual, "I don't know what you think. I think you've stolen over $75,000 from me in the past 8 months. I think you've been using your access to my accounts to fund your lifestyle while pretending to be loving, helpful family members. I think you're thieves." I heard a chair scrape against the floor, then Elliot's voice, strained and defensive. "Mother, that's a serious accusation. If there's been some kind of misunderstanding about the money transfers." "There's been no misunderstanding." Harriet's voice was cold as winter. "I have bank records, transaction histories, documentation of every dollar you've stolen. I have screenshots of social media posts where you joke about how easy it is to manipulate the old lady and laugh about me having a heart attack if I discovered what you were doing." The crash that followed sounded like someone had dropped a wine glass. That was my cue. I stood up from my chair in the study and walked into the dining room. The manila folder in my hands, Amara was standing beside the table, her face white as paper, staring at Harriet like she'd seen a ghost. Elliot had gone completely still, his mouth slightly open in shock. Between them, red wine was spreading across Harriet's white tablecloth from the shattered remains of a crystal glass. "Hello, Amara," I said quietly. My daughter's head snapped toward me, her eyes wide with panic and fury. "What is she doing here?" she demanded, turning back to Harriet. "She's the one who discovered what you were doing," Harriet replied calmly. "She came to me with evidence of your theft because, unlike some people, she has a conscience." Amara's face twisted with rage. "She's lying. She's trying to turn you against us because I refuse to let her treat you like a servant." I almost laughed at the audacity of it. Even now, even caught red-handed, she was trying to rewrite history. "Actually, Amara, You insisted that I treat Mrs. Whitmore like she was my employer. You demanded that I serve her and clean for her, remember? You said she was rich and I should know my place. That's not how it happened. It's exactly how it happened, Harriet interrupted. And now I understand why. You were conditioning me to feel powerful and superior so I wouldn't question the financial help I was supposedly giving you. You made me feel like a generous benefactor while you robbed me blind. Elliot finally found his voice. Mother, please, if you just let us explain. Explain what? Harriet's fury was building now, no longer contained by her aristocratic composure. Explain how you've been stealing from your own mother? Explain how you created fake consulting fees to funnel my money into your personal account? Explain how you laughed about my potential heart attack while you picked my pockets? I placed the manila folder on the table and spread out some of the evidence we'd compiled: bank statements, social media screenshots, records of fraudulent transactions. It's all here, I said to Amara and Elliot. Every transfer, every lie, every cruel joke at Harriet's expense. Did you really think you could get away with this forever? Amara's shock was transforming into desperate anger. You bitter old woman, she hissed at me. You couldn't stand that I had a good life, so you decided to destroy it. You destroyed it yourself the moment you decided to become a thief. I provided services. I helped manage her finances. You stole $75,000, I shot back. You called her the old lady behind her back and laughed about how easy she was to manipulate. Elliot was looking frantically between his mother and wife, clearly calculating his options. Mother, I think there's been a terrible misunderstanding. If some money was transferred inappropriately, it was without my knowledge. Don't, Harriet said, her voice deadly quiet. Don't you dare try to blame this on your wife while pretending to be innocent. Your architectural firm has been receiving payments for non-existent work. Your own staff called to ask about the fraudulent consulting fees. Elliot's face crumpled. The game was over, and he knew it. What do you want? Amara asked finally, her voice small and defeated. Harriet smiled, but it was cold and sharp as a knife. I want my money back. All of it. I want you both to sign statements admitting what you've done, and I want you to understand that you will never, ever have access to my finances again. And if we refuse, then my lawyer files criminal charges tomorrow morning. Elder abuse, theft, fraud. You'll both be facing prison time. The fight went out of Amara all at once. Her shoulders sagged, and she looked around the room like a trapped animal searching for an escape that didn't exist. How much time do we have? Elliot asked quietly. 72 hours to return the money and sign the admissions. After that, the police become involved. I watched my daughter's face as the reality of her situation sank in. This was the woman who had humiliated me in her kitchen, who had told me I was only valuable as a servant, who had cut me out of her life because I wouldn't submit to being treated like hired help. Now she was the one being humiliated, being forced to face the consequences of her own cruelty and greed. I should have felt triumphant. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I felt sad. This broken, desperate woman was still the child I had raised, the daughter I had loved. Even knowing what she'd done, even understanding who she really was, part of me grieved for the person I'd thought she could be. But a larger part of me felt something I hadn't experienced in years: self-respect. Harriet looked at me across the ruined dinner table, and in her eyes I saw not the imperious woman who had once ordered me to scrub her bathroom, but a fellow survivor of my daughter's manipulation. Yvonne, she said formally, I owe you more than I can express, not just for exposing this theft, but for showing me that I deserve better than to be surrounded by people who see me as nothing more than a source of money. Amara looked between us with something like horror, finally understanding that she'd lost more than just her victim. She'd created an alliance between the two women she'd tried to pit against each other. Mom, she said, turning to me with tears in her eyes, please, I made mistakes, but I'm still your daughter. Don't let her destroy our family. I looked at her for a long moment, remembering the little girl who used to climb into my lap when she was scared, The young woman who used to call me for advice about everything from career decisions to what to cook for dinner. You destroyed our family the day you decided I was only valuable as a servant, I said quietly. You lost me as a mother when you chose to see me as a tool for your schemes, rather than a person who deserved your respect. 3 months later, I was sitting in Harriet's sunroom, reviewing applications for the property management position she'd offered me, not as an employee, but as a partner in managing her extensive real estate holdings. It was work that respected my intelligence and experience, work that paid me fairly for my contributions. Amara and Elliot had returned most of the stolen money and signed the admission statements to avoid criminal prosecution. Their marriage hadn't survived the scandal. Elliot had filed for divorce within weeks, claiming he'd been manipulated by his wife. They'd lost their house, their cars, and most of their expensive possessions to pay back what they'd stolen. Amara had tried calling me several times in the weeks after the confrontation, alternately apologetic and angry, but I'd stopped answering. There was nothing left to say between us. I'd finally found what had been missing from my life for so many years: dignity. The right to be treated with respect, to have my contributions valued, to exist as more than just someone else's convenience. Harriet and I had built an unlikely friendship based on mutual respect and shared survival. We were two women who had been used and dismissed, who had found strength in refusing to accept that treatment any longer. I was 64 years old, and for the first time in decades, I was truly free. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.